Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is a
Konapani is a very well-known person.
very powerful festival and very high
Yes.
quality festival. And this
Right.
year, one of the Bangladeshi films has actually, got the main prize, the
Okay.
first prize, the champion. He's based in Germany. Shahin Dil Riaz. He made a film
Yeah.
on the bamboo culture, the
Yeah, Konapani is a very
economy,
well-known person.
the agriculture and the sociology behind it. So the
Oh,
name of the film
nice.
is, yeah, Bamboo Stories.
Is it available on YouTube somewhere? Because bamboo
Yeah,
is
yes, he has just recently, I think, released in YouTube somewhere.
okay.
So
I will check
maybe
it
you
out
can,
because
yeah, you can search for it by the director's name is Shahin Dil Riaz, Shahin Dil
okay.
Riaz, and the name of the film is Bamboo Story.
Okay. Because being an architect, I'm interested in the vernacular material. So bamboo is one of the main material
Yeah.
I'm interested to explore. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Mhm.
So I was once one of the jurors for the South Asian Film Festival.
Oh,
Okay.
really? That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a nice one. Yeah.
It's very
That
powerful.
film festival and then Himal South Asia. These two things
Himal
were a very
magazine,
good thing out of Kannad's group. Yeah.
yeah.
That
Actually
South
visited
Asia
to this
map
star,
with a
Lubnapa,
Yes,
Kanak and Shanta.
yes,
Mhm.
yes,
they are like my brother and sister. We're so close.
They're so committed in their cause and they're such a warrior, really.
yeah. But they closed the press recently, the
They
Jagdamba
moved it to
press.
Sri Lanka, I
I
think,
think
right?
they've
They
gone
moved it to Sri
online.
Lanka.
I don't know. I didn't read that. I read in the newspaper that the press is being closed because of the operational reasons and all that. So I think he's keeping some of it, the older one, as a memory, and rest of it is probably going to be sold or something, or maybe relocated somewhere else. I don't know the
No, he
story.
relocated in Colombo. That's what I heard,
Oh,
and
I
I've read
see.
somewhere else. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
he's based in Colombo
Uh,
now. This
I
Himal
see.
magazine thing, yeah.
I see.
He had to, play around
Hmm.
the
আচ্ছা
reality,
এখানে
he knows the
এতগুলো
reality, so
মৌলি
he had to.
এসছে
Hmm?
আসল মৌলি কোনটা একটু অন্যগুলো একটু নাম চেঞ্জ করো
জি
আসল
খালা
মৌলি তুমি একটু সাবিহা পারভিনকে একটু করবে
জি খালা আমি কল করছি ওনাকে
আর উনি লিংক পেয়েছেন
হ্যাঁ লিংক উনি পেয়েছেন ওনার সাথে কথা হয়েছে আমি হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে আমার লিংকটা ওনাকে দিয়েছি উনি বলেছেন ওটাতে প্রবলেম হলে উনি এই লিংকে জয়েন করবেন
আচ্ছা প্লিজ একটু করতে বল
আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ
অডিওটা বন্ধ করে থ্যাংক ইউ we just checking with Madam Sabia Parveen, the additional secretary.
Okay.
Lubnapa, আজকে format একটু different মনে হচ্ছে than the previous Zoom format.
No, exactly same, except that we are streaming this on YouTube. It's already being streamed.
Oh,
so,
you can do it simultaneously, having the meeting and being streamed to the YouTube, huh?
That's right. And then from YouTube, one of my dancers is then streaming it on Facebook.
Oh, okay, I see.
We are the dancers, the media savvy people. We will take, it's not yet 9, we will maybe start exactly at 9,
okay.
5 minutes after 9. We actually also have a couple of participants from India.
Okay.
Gautam Chandra Burman?
Intangible.
Oh, okay.
He's from the Open University.
Okay. I think he was one of the speakers also, huh? Sometime back, in one of your previous sessions.
Intangible is with the English department in the Open University.
Sorry, ma'am, I was late little bit. It's raining here. It's raining here.
The Intangible is our Indian participant.
Welcome to this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining with us.
Yes.
You're with the English department, aren't you, Intangible?
Yeah, English department.
So, Neel Kamal, just to give you a background, most of the participants have already completed one workshop on the basics of inventorying. And this workshop is slightly more because we wanted to do a workshop on critical research on ICH.
Okay.
Being able to understand the mechanism, being able to critique it, being able to, even when inventorying, to understand the importance of the community and giving a voice to the community. So that is why we did this. Basically, we will do this with about 1,500 to 1,600 students. And then we hope the 26th March 2021 is the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh. We hope to go public on the 50th anniversary.
Okay.
Let's see. A lot
Does
of
Nepal have this kind of ICH-pedia already in place?
No, I think they are working on it because Nepal ratified the convention very late. I think in 2010, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
I think they are still in the capacity building process and all that. I don't think anything has gone up yet.
Definitely will be there to play a very important role there then. Seems.
Let's hope. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, so
we
far in
also
the past few years, I've been focused only in teaching. So that's what I will be looking at.
we also have some community members from the Manipuri community and minority community, quite a few.
I think that's very important and good to hear.
Right.
That they're also part of it.
In spite of the fact that we are such a small country, we have about 19 or 20 indigenous communities.
Okay.
Including the Rakhine, Chakma, Garo, Shantal. This is the problem.
Yeah. Electricity, internet.
Yeah, here also same. If it rains, then even internet would be not so reliable. And there is a forecast for heavy rains for the next few days. So luckily right now it's
জি তাহলে উনি 5 মিনিটের মধ্যে জয়েন করবেন।
তোমার কাছে ইব্রাহিমের নাম্বার আছে, ওকে একটু হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ করবে?
তাহলে আমার কাছে ওনার নাম্বার নেই।
আচ্ছা, করছি। ইব্রাহিম যে নাম্বারটা তোমাকে পাঠাচ্ছি হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে, ও কি বলছে, ও ঢুকতে পারছে না।
আচ্ছা, তাহলে চেক করছি।
You had no problem, did you, Neel Kamal, joining the?
No, I didn't have any problem. It was smooth. Yeah.
What do you think? Will we be able to do this ICH-pedia? ইব্রাহিম কি তোমার এটা পাঠাও তো, just 2 more minutes.
Sure, sure.
We are very impressed with our new additional secretary, very dynamic lady.
Okay.
And she seems very enthusiastic, and so finally, hopefully, Bangladesh will get an inventory done. seems like she has joined. তো তোমার আইডি নিয়ে ঢুকেছেন মনে হয়। মৌলি তুমি কেউ পাঠাও, ইব্রাহিম কেউ পাঠাও। আপা আপনি কি ঢুকতে পেরেছেন? মৌলির আইডি নিয়ে কয়জন ঢুকেছে? যারা মৌলির আইডি নিয়ে ঢুকেছে তারা চেঞ্জ করে নিজের নামটা করে দাও প্লিজ। Okay, maybe we can start by very shortly introducing the students. Participants can introduce themselves to you. We are very, very grateful to Kamal Chapagain, Professor Kamal, for joining us all the way from Nepal. Though he is based in Ahmedabad, presently he is back in his hometown and he has been associated with ICH and cultural heritage studies for quite many years, and he's part of many UNESCO committees, including the what is it called? APFEN, isn't it?
APFEN-ICH. It's Asia Pacific Higher Education Network for ICH safeguarding.
Right. So we would also like to know about your center.
Sure, do that.
So what we have already done for this workshop is the first session was just on critical thinking, why we should do critical thinking. The second workshop was more on the convention and why it doesn't have that legal bite, but it sort of advises the state constantly to empower the community. But it hasn't given the state the mandate to make it legal, a legal instrument, though I think Korea has enacted some laws. I think Korea is the only country which has enacted some laws. So can you just very shortly introduce yourselves, please? Anandita, start karo with an A.
Hello, sir. My name is Anandita Khan. I'm a dance artist. Also, I'm doing my bachelor studies on administration. My major is tourism and hospitality management. Thank you.
Imran?
Hello, sir. I'm Hassan Istiak Imran. I'm a dancer. I'm completed my graduation and masters in Rabindra Bharati University from Kolkata, and now I'm doing teaching Kathak dance in Sadhana. That's all. Thank you.
We are very fortunate that Madam Sabiha Parveen has just joined us. Appa, thank you so much for making time for this. I would like to introduce you to Professor NK Chapagain. He is based in Ahmedabad, but he is Nepalese, so presently he's back due to COVID, I believe, back in Nepal. And he has many years of experience teaching cultural heritage. He will tell us about his institute and also about the need for the community to be involved. So I think we should begin because we will introduce ourselves later, and I'll just ask Madam Sabiha Parveen to say a few words, and then again, after your presentation, she can speak.
Thank you very much, Lubna Mariam. I think it is my great privilege I joined in such type of webinar meeting. In this pandemic situation, another side it is critical condition, but other side is a privilege to us. We can join wherever we are in the other side of the globe. We can close together and join and discuss in a meeting like that way. But today's, if I don't get mistake, it's a meeting about intangible cultural heritage management discussion. And I think this is from Ahmedabad University, Director and Associate Professor of Cultural Intangible Cultural Heritage, Associate Professor from the Ahmedabad University, Dr. Neel Kamal Champang, also here. Yeah. And I did not get any other participant. Maybe I can see the participant list here. There's a lot of participants is participating in this meeting. Maybe after hearing all of these things, I am new in this field because I joined in maybe 2 months of this in this ministry. But I'm very much eager to know every aspect of this cultural heritage. Cultural heritage. In respect of culture, if we preserve our heritage, it's a great potential for us, because in global wise, only heritage can introduce us very effective way. Because if we preserve our heritage, that it can give the essence of our way of life, our politics, our practice, and our day-to-day activities also. That with these few words, I would like to close myself. Maybe after hearing, I will conclude. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join with all of you. Thank you very much, Lubna Mariam.
Thank you. Neel Kamalji, it's your floor now.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Lubna. Thank you, Madam Sabiha Parveen. And thank you, all of you, for being with me this evening and for your
I think, man, there is a network issue. Maybe he has disconnected.
I think we should all switch off our audios and see.
Okay, sorry, I think I was lost for a moment, but I'm back.
Okay.
So yes, thank you for this opportunity. So let me right away move on to my presentation. I have a few slides prepared. I'll share that, and I hope I can contribute meaningfully to your discussion that you have been having for the last few weeks. I think so. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So as mentioned, the topic is community-based ICH inventorying and management. I'll also touch upon management. Here, I believe when we do an inventory in a sincere way, that itself contributes to the management. And you know, this is not two separate steps. This is very integral part of the step. As mentioned, I'm with Ahmedabad University. We have a Center for Heritage Management. And as Lubna requested, let me introduce our center also. It's a center which has a core mandate to offer a master's degree program to prepare sort of next generation of heritage management professionals. Now here, heritage, we deal in a very broader sense. We do not classify between the built and the intangible, the natural and the cultural. We try to propagate this idea that heritage is actually an integrated idea. Therefore, the classifications might be there, but in our practice, we should be thinking of heritage in a very broad sense. That's the approach we take. I think this will be visible when I talk about the example later on also. Today's presentation, mostly I would be thinking of these 4 key concepts. One is ICH documentation and inventory, which is the core of the topic, in which community is a very core player, which I believe you have been discussing in the past few sessions as well, while thinking critically about the intangible cultural heritage. therefore, because it involves community, there are certain ethical issues, and the 2003 UNESCO Convention also emphasizes on, even though it came slightly later than the convention itself, the ethics is a very important part of it. And then ultimately we try to see how a community-based, or in other words, a kind of a decentralized approach to inventory making is the key towards ICH safeguarding. And I think that's the core of the talk today. I had shared with you some reference readings. Lubna, I believe everybody has received this, right?
Yes, yes, everyone has.
So this is from UNESCO itself. UNESCO has a lot of capacity building materials, a lot of awareness and training materials available. And this particular document that I had shared with you is a very succinct document which refers to the convention, but also brings in important points from the operational directives and some other documents. And if I just recap, I'm sure you must have gone through this, but for today's conversation, I would like to recap some of the points that this document also has, which is from the convention itself. The key thing is the convention does talk about inventorying as a very important part of safeguarding process. Now here, many of us who are in the heritage sector are probably familiar with the World Heritage Convention before the ICH Convention. And we have to see the distinction between these two conventions. The 1972 World Heritage Convention was in a way very narrowly focused. It has the state party having the central role to play and all that. Coming to 2003, almost 30 years later, the 2003 convention, which is focused on intangible cultural heritage, it not only tries to address a major gap in the heritage sector, but it also gives us a lot of new thinking and new tools. And therefore, I think 2003 convention has a lot of critical things also in it, even though it's fully not practiced, but that is there. And therefore, it sort of dwells on the role of state parties and clarifies that state parties should not be looking at the convention as a goal in itself. Rather, it's just a means, and state parties needs to facilitate, to work towards that. And therefore, the inventory becomes a very important process from the very beginning. In fact, the ICH convention doesn't anticipate that state parties should submit to the UNESCO list. There are 3 lists that UNESCO has on ICH. It doesn't encourage, it in fact asks the state parties not to jump onto the list, but rather do the homework first. And this is where the inventory comes into place. So the inventory is the most essential thing that a state party must have after signing the ICH convention. I think that's a very important message. And then one of these articles also talks about inventories and how the state parties should play a major role there. But we have to keep in mind that the convention also gives a state party enough freedom to come up with their own inventories. You can have your own system of inventories. You can have your own format. You can even have your own classifications beyond what the convention has. So really this convention is I think the best convention out of other conventions that UNESCO has. And particularly it's also very recognized in terms of the emphasis and acknowledgement that it gives to the communities. Because when we think of ICS, the intangible cultural heritage, it is primarily with the community, it is of the community, and therefore it very clearly articulates that the community is at the core. And therefore, while talking about inventories, this material that you have, the guidance note, sort of draws upon the convention and the operational directives and the ethical principles and puts forward 8 guiding principles when we think about making inventories for ICH or ICH inventories. One is obviously from the convention itself, which talks about the ethical principle. It emphasizes that the consent from the community is the very fundamental thing. Because again, by very definition, it is the community's asset, community's knowledge systems, community's practices, the traditions that we're talking about. And therefore, without the consent of the community, an inventory cannot even begin. That's the very first principle. The second principle is, it's not just having a consent in any form, but it's also about continuing the involvement of the community in the inventory making process. That's another fundamental principle, very important principle. Now that then takes us to the third point, which is when we have an inventory outline done and we start preparing the inventory, that inventorying process needs to be very inclusive. Now here, a very anthropological idea is at the forefront that there is no community. In fact, there are communities. It's always plural. because there are so much diversity. You can look at from multiple perspectives. There is diversity, so we have to ensure that that diversity is included. That all kinds of aspects are there, and therefore being inclusive is the third principle that this document mentions. Now, substantial is a very academically very important component here, principle, because the inventory should not be just making of a list. Okay, we have this traditions as part of this inventory. It should also have a very substantial information about that particular element of ICH that we are making inventory of. And therefore, research becomes a very important part of it. And I believe we have been discussing about the critical research, which becomes very important to bring in a very objective, substantial, and a kind of a thick description about the ICH that we are talking about in this inventory. Then the fifth principle, I would say, it relates to the management aspect, that while preparing the inventory, we should not forget what is the fundamental purpose of creating this inventory. Creating of an ICH inventory is not to designate an ICH in a list and get a tag or something. It's not for that. It's primarily for safeguarding, promoting, preserving, and therefore the purpose has to be very clear. And here I would like to add my own perspective on this process, that the purpose of an inventory should not be just for the sake of safeguarding. It has to be integrally connected to the people's livelihood. In other words, if you prefer to use the word sustainable development or community development, that purpose has to be kept in mind, and we should keep in mind at the very beginning of the inventory making process. So this reference to the purpose is a very important principle that is mentioned here. And then the sixth is, when an inventory is created by keeping community at the center, by involving them with their consent, and also keeping in mind the ultimate purpose, then this cannot be a frozen document. It has to be a living document. And therefore, constantly updating becomes another important principle. Now, just keep in mind how these principles are being formulated. It's very nicely formulated and very critical, very living heritage idea that you can see in these principles. There are two more, which are, again, connecting back to the convention. Once the state party signs the convention, the state party has a responsibility to constantly report back to the UNESCO committee. And therefore, the seventh principle actually relates to reporting, which is reporting to the convention committee at the UNESCO office. But the way I would like to interpret this reporting principle is that if we are doing a community-based inventorying, I would also say that this reporting applies reporting back to the community. Because otherwise, this is not something that we prepare and put it somewhere. It has to be constantly given back to the community. And therefore, I would like to give my thoughts that this reporting also means reporting to the local level, whoever is the custodian or the practitioner of that ICH. And then the eighth very important principle is that this inventory is not to be kept somewhere for other purposes or not accessible to others. It has to be very well accessible to all the stakeholders, researchers, students, community members, organizations, government, everybody. It has to be accessible. Otherwise, this living document, cannot leave. So these are very nicely thought and put 8 principles that goes with the inventory. And as you can see, even though here the community-based inventory is not mentioned as a terminology itself, but you will see so many principles are grounded around community. And therefore, I believe this is also advocating for community-based inventories, even though that particular word is not being used frequently. Now, just to briefly touch upon how does the convention talks about this, maybe this might be something you have gone. I've only 2-3 slides I borrowed from this material from UNESCO, which is available to the UNESCO ICH trainers. It says, why are inventories needed? Of course, inventories are needed to first identify what are the ICH elements we have in our countries, in order to define them, in order to establish the rationale, the viability for safeguarding of that particular ICH, to build up relationship and work towards safeguarding. So there are many reasons. But what I would like to emphasize is we have to ask this very critical question. Okay, all these answer to these why questions, why are we doing this? For whom are we doing this? And again, the answer is, it is for the community in the very first place. It is not for UNESCO. It is not for the government. It is for the community. And I think this is an important aspect that we have to consider. It talks about gender. I think these are very important points. The convention also gives enough freedom to the state party while also saying that certain do's and don'ts. Now here also, if you think about it, something I already mentioned, that the convention doesn't freeze the concepts. The concepts are very much flexible. The state parties can define the typologies. It can come up with its own format. So it gives enough leeways. However, there are certain cautions that the convention gives. For example, of course, in the current geopolitical systems, one state party will be only talking about ICH within its own territory. But ICH cannot be bounded in a political boundary. I believe some of the ICH elements that you might have in Bangladesh, I'm sure probably we're also sharing similar elements in Nepal as well. But then there is a political restriction. Maybe you talk about Bangladesh, I talk about Nepal. But keep in mind this restriction, these limitations that we have, right? So there are a few things also that the convention training materials highlights, which I'm not going to go in detail. But again, while going through this, we should keep in mind who is doing it, who is making the inventory. Is it us, the so-called experts, or is it the community? And I think this is the question that I would like to dwell upon most, because I'm talking about community-based inventory. So if it is community-based inventories, then what is the role of us who are probably an outsider? So this question becomes very important, and I'll come back to this question in the later part of my presentations. Then, what are the scope and size of these inventories? Like how big should be the inventory? At what level should this be? Should this be at the national level or the local level? And all kinds of things. And the 2003 convention, as well as its operational directives, very clearly emphasizes or makes it clear that each state party might have its own system of inventories. It can have number of inventories. It can have different hierarchies of inventories, even though the convention says that there should be no hierarchies among ICH elements. So in this kind of discussion, the scope and size, again, we have to ask this critical question. At the fundamental level, who is at the core of this inventory? Who is it for? Again, that first question that I asked. But then also, what is at the core? At the core, it is about ICH, which is of the community. And therefore, whether we have n number of inventories or we have big or smaller inventories depends on what kind of ICH are we talking about. And therefore, the state parties can manipulate. There is no fixed answer to these questions. And how should this be organized? Again, this is up to the state parties. But the convention very clearly reminds the state parties that there should not be hierarchies. Preparing an inventory is not to give that, okay, these are A categories and these are B categories. These kind of hierarchies are discouraged. Now, why it is important for us to remember? Because the other parallel convention, the World Heritage Convention, has a kind of a hierarchy created within this system. But this convention tries to move beyond that. At least that's the principle that it has. And it also reminds the state parties that there might be new categories that has to evolve as you do more and more of ICH inventories, and let it be evolving in that way. So it can be done in consultation with the communities and other stakeholders. Now, I mentioned ethics becomes an important part in this process because we're constantly talking about communities. And when it is about communities, when the communities are the bearers, owners, the transmitters, then we as a researcher, professionals, government agencies, we have to bear in mind certain ethical principles. And the convention has 12 ethical principles, which can largely be categorized under these three categories. The first set of principles we can connect to the recognition, the documentation, inventory making aspects. There are certain ethical principles there. Second aspect is how do we approach the process, the reaching out to communities, working with them. So the consent process, making sure that access is there. These are all the second group of ethical principles. The third group of ethical principles are who is it for? Who does this process benefit? So that's the third set of ethical principles. So again, I'm not going into detail here. I'm sure you might have touched upon this, but I wanted to reflect on these issues because when we talk about community-based ICH inventory, we have to keep in mind these ethical principles. We have to keep in mind what are the fundamental principles that the ICH convention has and therefore should be at the core of ICH inventories, and how important community becomes part of this whole conversation. And therefore, now I would like to talk about my case, and I'll share how from my university, particularly my Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University, how we have tried to contribute in this process. Now, I have a disclaimer here to make. We have not prepared an inventory that can be called that, oh, this Center of Heritage Management has this inventory done. We are not an agency under the state party. We are not working for UNESCO. What we are doing in an academic institution, we are participating in this very collaborative process. And for our own learning, we have picked up a region nearby our city, Ahmedabad, the region of KUTCH, which borders with Pakistan, and it's the western part of India. A very interesting geographic region, has evolved with its own unique culture and landscape and all kinds of things. And so we have taken that as our learning site. And so what happens briefly at the center, we run a master's program, and in master's program, we try to work with communities, learn with communities, and develop this collaborative process. And therefore, we need a community that is nearby where we can go every semester, learn something. And therefore, this KUTCH is our kind of a laboratory for our heritage learning. And that's why I'm focusing on this one. Now, just to give you an idea about the location, Bangladesh somewhere here. This blue dot here is my location right now in Nepal. So I'm very close to you. And my university is the other end of the continent, subcontinent. And then this is the closer view. Now, why this region that I want to focus? One, as I mentioned, this is learning site for us because this is nearest region. But there is a very historic importance that this region has, that this region being sort of, in between, sort of in border between India and Pakistan, it has multiple layers of culture, the migration movements, a lot of interesting things, the landscape layers, the biodiversity, everything. Now, all this has evolved into a unique set of ecosystems, unique set of cultural practices. Now, these practices were challenged when in 2001, there was a major earthquake in this region. And after that earthquake, when the communities were trying to be reviving themselves, and there were many organizations that were helping the community to revive, a very important lesson for us to keep in mind, heritage started playing a major role. And this is where the ICH, even though the word ICH is not used by these communities or the organizations there, this is very important. The word itself is not used because this was in 2001, this whole movement was taking a major momentum. The ICH convention came in 2003. But whatever they were doing resonates very well with the ICH idea, and therefore this is a very important site. And so just to give you an idea, there are many crafts that these communities have, and there are organizations like Khamir, Setu, Punarshala, there is one on music also, I just forgot the name. So there are many organizations, community-based organizations working on different sectors. And if you think about them, it's all about ICH, even though they don't use the term ICH. Just a few more crafts practices from the region. These are all from the Khamir. Khamir works with these craft artisans. And because of this, and we also have Ms. Susma Iyengar is our adjunct faculty. She's our adjunct faculty. She's based in KUTCH, and she is a kind of very important person dealing with many organizations driving this whole community-based movements. And we are fortunate to have her as part of our faculty team. And therefore, she facilitates us going to the KUTCH region every year and spending some time in the region itself, navigating from village to village and studying various aspects of intangible cultural heritage. And we call it indigenous knowledge systems. From the bunny buffalo breeding to various crafts. And so we spend time with the villagers, the artisans, the buffalo herders, the camel herders, the multiple generations. And we talk about different aspects of ICH. And these interactions is very meaningful. So it's a very interesting course that we do, thanks to Susma Iyengar. And this is what we realized after doing the course for 2-3 years, that we also started feeling that, we can't just be going to KUTCH and doing a course, learning from them. We also need to be contributing back to the process. And this thought led to, for us to frame an idea, an initiative at our center, which we gave the name Heritage Learning Lab. Now, the idea of this Heritage Learning Lab was, since we go to KUTCH and learn with these communities, how can we have an initiative whereby which we also contribute back to the community? And this is where I would like to mention one of my students who already graduated, Leora Pejarkar. So Leora Pejarkar was one of our students in the very first batch in 2015. And in our program, when students have to do a practicum, which is an internship, she decided to go to these villages to do her practicum with an organization named Setu. Now, in that process, what happened was, this process is very important. So, since Leora spent time with the communities, she started understanding the relation making with the communities, the different perspectives and all that. And she was so well immersed that she actually started influencing the communities to think about their heritage. She started influencing the organizations to think of heritage as a resource to be thought of when they're thinking about local development. So this immersion is very important part for us as a researcher, as a student, as an academics. When we think of community, we have to immerse in a community context, understand their culture and dynamics, and that becomes very important in this community-based inventory process. But at that point, we had not thought about this inventory. Now, when the local organizations also approached us, then we, under this Heritage Learning Lab, we started formulating a process whereby we thought of a collaboration. And the picture that you see here is a week-long workshop that we did for the communities. So there were 20 villager fellows that were nominated, and they came to the university. We spent 1 week with them, giving them some basic tips about how do we document, how do we prepare an inventory, what should we be looking at, but also listening to them and defining our approach. For example, the picture below you see Khimji Bhai, who is a very active member of his village, had a lot of this knowledge. Now, all we are doing is helping him to put his knowledge into some kind of systematic format. So here, for example, in this picture, he's just sharing the different kind of soil that he has in his village and what kind of property that soil has and where it can be used. You know? So he has the knowledge. We're only helping him to organize that knowledge in a systematic manner so that even academicians and research can also understand, and therefore it contributes to making an inventory. That's the process we're following. Now, what Leora and many of our colleagues did, I think we had 4 of our graduates working in these villages. We started with 5, we wanted to start with 5 villages, but I think practically we started with 3 villages last year. And what we started doing was this group of villagers that were trained, they and our students and graduates, they formed a collaborative team. And then they started talking to the villagers, the elderly people, the women's different practitioners, the artisans and all that. And gradually they started capturing their stories, the meaning, what they do. And gradually out of that long process, they started abstracting some kind of a thing that we can call as ICH, right? So what I'm trying to emphasize here is they're not looking at ICH floating as if on the landscape. They're looking deeper into the history, the culture, the stories, the narratives, the memories, their everyday life. And gradually, through a collaborative process, they're trying to identify certain elements that we might want to call as ICH. That's what these groups of graduates are doing together with these villagers that were sort of part of this training program we did to make sure that, we speak the same language and, have some kind of common methodology. This is what we did. And so this is an ongoing process. I think they were at the, I think last March, but this pandemic sort of disturbed the process. Last March, they were finalizing their first version of what we can call as an inventory of these 3 villages where they were identifying what are the important elements that these villages have. Now here, I want to emphasize this inventory making process. We are not calling it as an inventory. We called it, in fact, Susma Iyengar, myself, Tresta from Setu, we're the sort of, and Vijay Ramchandani, my colleague in center, we're sort of the guiding team, mentoring team, and Leora was leading the field team, and our other graduates, Salja and Gaurav, they were helping with the villagers. And so we're trying to come up with a document which captures what are the important aspects in this village, which the villagers, particularly the village panchayat, the local governing body, should keep in mind and try to integrate in their village development plan. That was the objective. We're not doing it for UNESCO. We're not doing it for the government of India in Delhi. We're doing it for the local government so that the local government can identify, recognize what they have in their villages and think how that can be leveraged for their local development. And through that, how the local community benefits from this process. That was the whole idea. And therefore, we're doing it but since last March, I think this sort of got stuck because Leora had to come back to Mumbai, her home. And so, but this process is very important. We learned several lessons out of this process. We realized certain shortcomings in our academic way of thinking. We realized certain gaps But I think where we are happy is we realize the value in this collaborative process. We realize the real essence of the community-based inventory making process. I think this is where we all are feeling very good about, feeling strong about, and realizing, okay, the next step, what we should do to improve the process. Now, the ultimate outcome of this would be a document which the villagers can use, not for the villagers to use, so that they can use that to go and talk to the state government, negotiate the development plans, the budget, and then move forward. Just a few weeks back, we had a webinar where one of these village serpents, the headman, was invited. It was so powerful to listen to him, how he was thinking about his village resources, what we call as ICH. And then so it's a very interesting process that we have gone through. So it's a process. So I can explain if I have more time. But just to sort of summarize what I'm trying to say here, these are the following are what I consider as the pillars of community-based ICH inventory. And when we follow this ICH inventory making as a process which is grounded in community, I think that's the beginning of a better management of ICH itself. We don't have to create a separate management plan. This inventory process itself guides us towards a sustainable management. What are those? First and foremost, as I mentioned the story of Leeway, one has to immerse into the community. And from anthropology, we can learn how to immerse. There are multiple ways, and we can do a rapid process, we can do a long process. But this is very important that we need to be able to understand the community, thoroughly. You have to be grounded there. We have to develop a mutual respect and acknowledgement, because otherwise this process is not going to go anywhere. It cannot be an expert driven. It cannot be just the community just picking up whatever they think. It has to be a collaborative process, and that mutual relationship is very important. Then we need to put up the process, which has to have a collaborative model, but which puts the community at the core, not the experts at the core, community at the core. Sorry, I think I again lost my flow. Right, so I was at this slide. Yeah. So the third is this collaborative process where community at the center, because it's their ICH, it's their heritage that we're talking about, and it is for them, right? The question that I asked in the very beginning, looking at the ICH principles, and then the framework that we have to come up has to connect. So again, as I mentioned, the inventory is not for UNESCO, not for the government somewhere else. It's for that particular context, and therefore this has to connect back to the local context. And then we have to think of a mechanism which connects this inventory to whatever is the process. It could be a development process, it could be a planning process, it could be an economic planning or development, whatever process. There has to be a region. There has to be an aim for this inventory, which the convention also talks about. And ultimately, this can be done if we have a consortium. I think the consortium is very important. And that's why, if you remember, in the beginning of my story, I told what is our role. We as an academic center, learning from this community, because that's how we want to learn and propagate this heritage idea. But then we felt it's our responsibility to contribute back. And this is where this consortium is evolving. There is a local organization, there are community partners, and there is academic institution. There are students, graduates floating across the city and the rural areas. There are villagers who come to the university training. We go to the village, engage with them. And so there is this kind of consortium that is required. So I think, in my opinion, for a community-based ICH inventory process and leading towards a management, these are the key principles. Now, what is the example? A better example than this one, which I shared with you, and I hope you have gone through it. And I'll very briefly touch upon this because you have the whole document to look at. This document is very inspiring. This is called the Biocultural Community Protocol of the Kamal Pastoralists of KUTCH. Now, what we're trying to do in this project that we have been doing since last year is to come up with similar document where the community tells their stories. It's not the experts telling the stories, what they have. Now, this is an example because this is done earlier, and you can see a range of organizations. This is the consortium that is working behind it. And even though Susma's name is not mentioned there, I believe Susma Iyengar is the key behind it. So I would like to especially acknowledge her. But then this document is of this organization, which is the KUTCH Camel Breeders Association. So there is a very unique community. It's a mobile community. It's a Maldari community which breeds the camel, and they keep two kinds of camel. You know, the Karai camel and the other camel. So this belongs to this particular organization of the community itself. Now, just to give you some highlights from this document, you know, keep in mind what it talks about, how it talks about. Now, this is the very first page. And to me, this is the philosophy of community-based ICH inventory. Look at it. Never separate butter from milk. Remember, this is camel herding community, right? So for them, camel is at the center. So their ICH revolves around camel. Now let's look at this. Never separate butter from milk, right? It's a vocation, it's a profession. But what it means is it talks about the value, because what they believe is you drink that milk with the butter in it so that the richness is not left out. You don't separate the richness and sell it out and just drink the plain milk. You drink the milk with the whole richness in it. You know, that's the essence. Never sell clothes that women wear, meaning that what we call as an, you know, the art. There are so many textile art in KUTCH. What this community is saying is this art is not for market. This is for us. This is for our women. So there is a purpose behind this art. There is a meaning, there is value associated. So keep in mind that sole purpose, sole value. So meaning I say for us in the foremost situation. Never give up building the house with grass and straw. Very important. As an architect, for me, this is a very important point that they have mentioned, and I'm so inspired with them. You know, but this is a philosophy. This touches upon multiple aspects of ICH elements. You can abstract, coming from architecture, agriculture, herding, craftsmanship, your everyday life, gender issues, everything is embedded in this. So this is a philosophical statement in the very beginning. Whenever this happens, know that danger is close. Now your safeguarding question. If these 3 points are happening in your society, in your camel herding community, then know that your ICH is in danger. That's what it's saying. Very important philosophy. Now look at how the chapters are organized. You can go into the document, but say the introduction, the first chapter, how do they introduce themselves? That place where camels, buffaloes, and cows pasture, share pasture, sharing, where milk and chass means the buttermilk, flow like water, like it's abundantly available to the community, where the Maldharis, meaning the camel breeders, make their home. That's KUTCH. You know, so it's very grounded in the context, the landscape itself. Now the second chapter talks about their culture, and the philosophical statement here is this is the best way to move from place to place because they are nomadic people, meet many different people, and to keep good relationship with other communities. Why should we want to live any other way? You know, you have to see the value in your own culture. Then you can see the different elements of ICH as a valuable thing. So this document has so many, and just look at the table of contents. You know, there are ICH elements. It talks about the animals, the knowledge systems of camel rearing. You know, it could be an ICH. Grazing resources. How do you graze? It's a so interesting story of the grazing land in KUTCH. You know, how do you maintain? How do you share? How do you care about it? And then it also has challenges. It talks about their rights. Now, this entire document is to put forward this community's rights in front of the governments, in front of the international community. And therefore, this is not the inventory the way the ICH convention is thinking. But to me, this is the best way to think about an inventory where you are looking at the philosophies, you are looking at the very important values, you are looking at the community at the core, but then you're also looking at your challenges. You're questioning yourself in today's time, talking about challenges, looking at the laws and governance, the system that you are in, and then thinking internationally, and then making a commitment, you know. So go through this document, very inspiring document. And to me, that's the kind of community-based inventory that we should think of. What should be the ultimate format? It's up to you. Bangladesh can have its own format. Nepal can have its own format. But I think this process to me is very important. And that's what I wanted to share with you today in today's presentation. So I would like to sum up by saying, for me, community-based ICH inventory should be able to capture the context. It should be able to talk about the cultural values. It should also be able to give a place for community voices. While as an inventory, it articulates a range of knowledges and practices that we might consider as an elements of ICH. It should be owned by respective communities, not by UNESCO, not by us. The ownership should go to the community itself. And therefore, if there is any IP issues and all that, I think we need to discuss that. Should be of use to them for their dignity, positioning, and decision making about the upkeep of their values and systems. Very important ethical and management points here. the all sole purpose of the ICH inventories should be to bring the dignity to them, respect, position themselves in a way that they are able to make their decisions so that they can upkeep their values and systems their own way. And this can be done by documenting various ICH elements while also highlighting the interrelationship across the elements. Let's not treat ICH elements in silos. They are always interrelated, right? In KUTCH, there are so many examples of so many wonderful ways that these different elements interrelate to each other. So that's we should remember. And such a community-based ICH inventory helps eventually in management of the same ICH too. So management is not a big deal if you have done the inventory in a right way. If you have made it accessible to all stakeholders, government, organizations, researcher, it should be a transparent document. And therefore, it becomes a very powerful tool for the management also. And therefore, while preparing the inventories, a community-based inventory process should be able to trigger a range of interests and initiatives. That's what is happening in KUTCH. I mentioned this Sarpanch, the village headman, giving a webinar to us. How powerful he was talking about his village in the COVID crisis was mind-blowing. Now, our inventory should be able to help these people have that confidence and come up with initiatives that should function as an ecosystem so that they are self-supporting themselves, so that it helps in improving the quality of life. In other words, the sustainable development, also thinking of the environment, while also, uplifting the values and also meeting the aspirations of the living. It's not about freezing the life back in the time. It's about also making it very contemporary. So sustaining the aspirations as well. So to me, this is in a nutshell, the community-based ICH inventory process. So I would like to stop here, Lubna. I hope this made somewhere, and I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have.
Thank you so very much. So we see that you are looking at inventorying as a process more than the product. And within the process, you're also talking about the safeguarding of the practices. So is this just this one document that has been made, or is this one of many other documents that you have produced from this community?
Yeah, let me have a disclaimer. This document is not produced by us. This is something we are looking at when we started engaging with this region. Okay. But then over time, what we came to recognize is because of this process, there are other communities also. For example, the bunny buffalo breeder. So there is a very unique breed of buffalo. This community has also come together and they have gone through the process. I don't think they have come up with the similar kind of a document, but what that process led was they have actually had a GI tag for their buffalo breed. So now it's their patent breed. None other communities, so it led to the safeguarding, it led to the management, right? And there is another community, it's a farmer community. They have their own variety of seeds. Now they have started a seed bank, and in fact, they're also trying to, put together a organic seed museum. That's a concept one of our students also working last year with the communities and the organization. So you see, this takes different forms. That's why I want to say it as a process and a living thing. The form can take anything, but the ultimate thing is it should fulfill the very purpose that the process started, And for me, KUTCH is so wonderful place, and people like Susma, there are organizations working on architectural sector, the craft, the economics, the museum, everything. It's such a nice, ecosystem. I'm so privileged to be able to learn with them, work with them, and in some ways also try to contribute back. So since last year, I think our take is since last year, I've been able to start sending our graduates back to the community and help in this process. So the document that my students, graduates are working, as I mentioned, it was in a semi-final format in March, but then the process stopped because of the COVID. Everybody had to come back home. So I think a similar kind of document that we're finalizing, but it's not in the same format. It's a slightly different format because the purpose of that document was this other new document is to help the village governance come up with the local development plan so that the budget that they make also contributes for this kind of a safeguarding process. So there is this kind of relations we're trying to find out. So this is just an example that was there, but I think it has moved beyond this right now.
I think, thank you so very much, because we were a little bit stuck with the UNESCO format of inventorying. And this gives us another perspective of inventorying as a process. We will certainly take a look at, I was very impressed with the document. But one thing I want to mention is that is the document powerful enough to influence the local government to support capacity building or infrastructure for heritage management?
I think, listening to the Sarpanch, the village headman, and also to Susma Iyengar and other colleagues there in Kutch, what we learned was these villages, when they have these documents, they use this as their voice. When they go to the state government, when they ask for certain fundings, they use this as their representative voice to make their case. And therefore, I think they negotiate what kind of infrastructure, they negotiate what kind of policies they would need. So I think I'm not sure about this particular document itself because it was done a few years back. But in the new negotiations, I have heard, this process, these documents have been very helpful to these communities. That's why this process is still on. And thanks to people like Susma who are still driving this process, learning from each step and improving in the next community, So yes, absolutely. I think this would be a tool for the community to have their voice heard in any negotiation process.
The other thing is that this is in English, so definitely it is mediated by the experts.
Yes, that is there. Yes, absolutely. That's why that range of organizations is mentioned there. Yes, yes.
So I would like to open the floor up to our participants if they would like to, and also Mr. Alam Khurshid, who is one of our consortium, and our additional secretary Sabiha Parveen would like to question you.
No, not a question. I would like to give thanks to Dr. Neel Kamal Chapagain for his nice presentation regarding critical research on intangible cultural heritage. It's also community-based intangible cultural heritage. But Dr. Chapagain, I would like to know, I'm very new in this sector. That's why I want to know, I know that heritage is tangible and intangible. The basic difference between tangible and intangible heritage. What is the basic difference? How you differentiate? Maybe tangible means which can be touched, and intangible maybe some practice, way of living, some storytelling or weaving pattern, or which you cannot touch, but it not static side by side also. It can be transmit generation after generation. Then how we can differentiate? It's very difficult. And when it is community-based research, which methodology would be more convenient for community-based intangible cultural heritage?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I think we start with this differentiation that there are tangible, there are intangible. But whether you go from the tangible route or the intangible route, when you start understanding any heritage deeper, you start seeing that what you think is tangible is very much about intangible. What you think is, for example, music is intangible, right? But then more deeper you go into music, music has its own tangible aspects to it. And therefore the separation becomes problematic, and then you say, no, it's actually all integrated, right?
Interrelated.
and therefore I think, yes.
But in 2003 convention, it's only about intangible cultural heritage.
Intangible.
That's why I'm asking why you make differentiation, because there is 1972 also, it is tangible cultural heritage, maybe preservation and conservation. And there is 3 convention, I think, UNESCO, 1972, 2003, and another is, I forgot maybe. But
there is one in 2005 also. Yes.
Yeah. But some operational guideline is different. Depending on this convention, they make operational guidelines, I think, and these operational guidelines time to time they update it.
Right.
It depends on. That's why I'm asking, as you are expert of this line, then which research methodology would you think best in community-based intangible cultural heritage research? Which methodology?
So,
Participatory case study?
Sure. Yes, let me first clarify between the various conventions. My approach is we should look at these conventions as documents evolving at certain time in history. Like in 72, the first convention came, which was on the World Heritage. So that time, the focus was on at least preserving the, the very tangible sites, monuments, and all that. So it happened when they realized, not talking about intangible, we can't really preserve all these heritage sites. Then that whole discussion for the 30 years led to this 2003 convention. So I think we should not see these two as opposed to each other or like mutually exclusive to each other. I think since the 72 convention was there, UNESCO had to work with that, and 2003 came as a complementary. So I think we should look at these as a complementary conventions, and as a community, I think we should be able to use any convention that works. But at the end of it, I think you borrow something from the World Heritage Convention, something from the ICH. Now that's what decides the methodology. For example, if I were to think of a community, probably I would start with an sort of ethnographic methods, because you have to first talk to the community, understand, go deeper, and also starting with the ethnographic, maybe then you have the participant observation methods, those kind of methods from ethnography, anthropology you can borrow. Then obviously then you start reaching out to maybe architectural methods where you do the mapping, then preparing those documentary and all that. So I think I would like to think of a mixed methodology. It depends where you start. If you are looking at the landscape first, then maybe you start with the architectural planning methodology first and then go into ethnography gradually. If you want to go from the ICS route, then maybe start with the ethnography and bring in the mapping and others. So I think it's a decision that we have to take.
It depends on what kind of elements you choose first. Then you can decide what kind of methodology you use. But maybe it's combination of two or more. But I think when it is community based, it is very difficult, because in a community there is this different actors and co-actors. Power structure also. Yes. But this is very difficult task for researchers to do with community, work with community. If they can manage, but it is very difficult task, as far I know. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's why in the very beginning I mentioned, one of the first pillar I mentioned is immerse in the community, understand that dynamics. What you mentioned, that dynamics is a key. If the researcher doesn't understand the dynamics, then I think we are just floating, we're in the cloud and don't know the ground reality. And therefore, that's why I used the example of one of my graduates, one of my students. For her, the process started way back, and that's what makes her a very comfortable person today to go and guide all these young researchers from the village, but also from the university. And she becomes the bridge. I think we have to think of that kind of modality. That's why, again, the collaboration becomes very important, and this is where the participatory methods and all that. Yes.
Yeah. And one thing I think, this kind of paper, what you present here, maybe Lubna Patel's, it can be helpful for the research planner to make planning or for this community. What kind, if research paper or research document have over this community, it helps to planner or administrator to reshuffle their planning based on this research.
Right.
I would like to share here one safeguarding project we have with the Manipuri community in Bangladesh. We have been working with them. We actually didn't know at all about ICH or the convention. We just started working with them because as dancers, we wanted to share the Manipuri dance, which we learned formally as a classical dance from our guru in India. And while the Manipuri community in Bangladesh actually they lost the art of dance because of the distancing from the main Manipur and Bangladesh. So we just went there to teach them dance. But then we have now, for 7 years, we have been doing this. We have become part of the community and we have built a trust.
Right.
So, and now they are more than willing to, help us come up with. I found your document very interesting, and we were thinking that maybe we could also try to come up with a process where, we can get the community to cooperate. So I would like the student participants to please talk, especially Sweeti Das Chaudhary, who has been working with the Manipuri community.
Yes, Lubna Appa. Hello, sir. I am Sweeti Das Chaudhary. I am a Manipuri dancer. As Lubna Appa said that Sadhana is working with Manipuri community in 2000 since 2030. I just want to know that you said that heritage learning lab. So which type of work we are said that heritage learning lab? Is this we are doing this Manipuri community this type of work we are said that, or we are doing some library or some work for this community?
What she wants to know is exactly how the Heritage Lab operates.
Right. So basically, Heritage Learning Lab is our contribution to this process in those communities. So there is a local organization called SETU. SETU, the word means bridge. So this SETU is a local organization there which works with these different communities, and so they help communities, to identify which village we can work and all that. And SETU and CHMI Center, we partner. And from our center, the Heritage Learning Lab is name given to this initiative because fundamental thing is we have been going to these communities to learn, do our own courses, learn and come back. Now with this initiative, we also wanted to give back something, contribute. And therefore it's a collaboration. So what I mentioned in the presentation, the first we started the lab with, giving training to 20 villagers. They came to the university for 7 days, 1 week. And full days.
For choosing the 20.
So this is where the SETU came. So the SETU, the local organization, worked with the local village panchayats, and the village panchayat selected 2 fellows from each village. Okay. And then they were facilitated by SETU to come to Ahmedabad, to our university, and we hosted them for a week. And then basically our students, us and these people, it's a very collaborative workshop. So we started talking about what is heritage, what is important, what do we know? And once we established that, then we started talking, okay, how should we go about it? How should we document this? So we talked about audiovisual documentation. We talked about how to write the stories, how to collect, how to talk, how to capture, So once we have that modalities cleared and we agreed on the modalities, then the villagers went back and some of our graduates went back and these graduates were working with them. That's the model we followed. So the Heritage Learning Labs model is basically wherever we engage with the community to do our own learning courses, we also find a mechanism that we develop a collaborative project and start contributing back. And so KUTCH is our first pilot project. We are doing it. But I would also mention here, it's not perfected. For example, some of the challenges we faced was these 20 villagers who were here for a week with us for training. When our students were in their village, their time was divided in so many things. Somebody had to go fetch grass for the buffaloes or go for milking or this and that. Our students were there, 24 hours available to do this documentation, right? Now, this kind of thing, this is where immersion becomes very important. You have to understand their life. You have to understand how are things working. And therefore, you go prepared with that mindset that, I should not be expecting, I finish the documentation in 1 week. What we consider as 1 week have to be stressed over 1 year probably, right? Now, you understand this very important part of planning your own process. Your inventory will not be complete in 1 month. So that's why this inventory in last March, I think there was an expectation that we'll finish this inventory by September. But then it couldn't be finished because it just didn't work out that way. So we're learning how to make the plan. So we're still learning, but I think what we're happy about is it's a process and we have reached out to them. I think there is a trust building, as Lubna said rightly, that we have built a trust between the university center and the community organization. So this tripartite trust is there, which allows us to go there every year and come and understand. So I think we are gradually evolving into a model. And again, I think much thanks to Susma because she's grounded there. She's based there and she's behind, she's the core mentor for all of us. So because of that, I think we have now start seeing a model coming up, which we think can be replicated across India. That's the scale we are thinking. But of course, there are challenges. I would not discount that there are no challenges. There are challenges. There are very, very valid practical challenges you have to come up. So if I connect back to your question, if there is a dancer community, if dance is the ICH element we are talking about, I think this model will look at this community of dancers or the practitioner of dancer and probably engage with them to understand, okay, what needs to be done? Is it the practice needs to be transmitted? Is it some form of documentation? Is it, making it viable for them to continue? What are things? But you find it not by just doing an interview. You find it by spending time with them, shadowing them, maybe dancers dancing with them. You understand it better by engaging, participant observation methods. And then gradually you understand and you come up with a methodology and work so that as a student, as an academic researcher, as much as we are doing our research and understanding, the point is this also should contribute back to the community. By the time we finish our research, this should also have certain objectives made. This should also have certain outcomes of that process. If there is no outcome, then this is one-sided. That's the kind of a philosophy that we are trying to develop there. But the key is, I think you have to, develop that relationship, and that probably takes time. So in case of KUTCH, I think that 2001 earthquake gave a very good opportunity for many of these organizations to have that relationship build up, and that's why they are very active and they are very successful also. Like Kamal, very good example, working in the craft sector. There is Hunar Sala, which works in the sort of vernacular building sector. Survani was the organization that I was trying to remember. This works in the music sector. Yeah, Lubna.
Excuse me, but I don't see any government representation in the consortium. Was that intentional?
No, this one, the Kamal one, the Maldari, I think was mostly at the community level, all these community organizations involved. Yeah, you're right. And even today, I think government doesn't come as a specific, only when there is a scheme, then probably a state government would come into the picture. But I think in all of this, they always work with the local government, the village level government. I think that is always there.
Because
so
Bangladesh has established 7 indigenous community cultural centers all over Bangladesh. So as Madam Sabiha Parveen is with us, she is very interested in involving these cultural centers within the process.
So they could be like an anchor, I think, in my opinion, not knowing enough about them. I think these kind of centers could be an anchor where all the stakeholders, it's a common ground where stakeholders would come and maybe, take some common decisions and then again spread around.
Instead of coming to Dhaka, they can go to the cultural center and do this collaboration which you did in Ahmedabad. I'm just thinking off my head. Instead of, like, you brought your villagers all the way to Ahmedabad, maybe we could use the cultural centers as the focal point where the 2 or 3 all the parties can meet up.
Yeah, I think we could think of that. I think while thinking, I also realized, since Susma is based at KUTCH and the way she works, I think, again, this kind of lead organizations has to always play a negotiating role. The negotiation is very important. The government doesn't come proactively many times. One has to reach out to government proactively and negotiate. I think particularly with the Tamil herding communities, there had been a very good progress in India. I think in Delhi, there is some other kind of consortium built up because there was a traveling exhibit going around and it came to Ahmedabad also. It was in Delhi also. So, the works are happening at multiple levels. And therefore, I think some anchoring organization, if there is one, it's always beneficial, that always makes the progress and the process easy. But I think there's also enough opportunity across South Asia, for these kind of partnership because it's a shared culture. It doesn't stop at the borders.
One of our participants has raised his hand, Sukanta Sinha from the Manipuri community.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mashi, for permitting me. Sir, thank you for your deliberative presentation, and we have learned so much from it. But I have a question from your presentation. I would like to know that if a single community lives in 2 or more countries, and if a element is we pick up from them element, which will be included in the ICH of UNESCO, then is it necessary to take the consent of the community from the both countries?
You're talking about communities in two different countries, right?
Yes, a single
because
community.
he's from the Manipuri
Right.
community.
Yes,
They have the Ras
yes,
Leela, which is
Okay. Yeah, on that one, if you're talking about the list as under the ICH convention, it recognizes that you can recognize that there is similar community across the border also. But just the simple fact of the political situation, all that, like the jurisdiction of each state parties, it doesn't require you to go across the border and get the consent. It asks you to only get the consent from within your jurisdiction. However, if the other state party recognizes or nominates the similar element, I think it gets recognized both ways. So, which is interesting as compared to the World Heritage Convention, because in World Heritage Convention, when you go across the boundary, because it's a fixed place-based nomination, the both party has to come together and sign an agreement. Here, that's not the case, because ICS is not limited to a place. It can be wherever the community there is the ICS, right? So I think that limitation is not there. You can pretty much do within your own country. And that's the limitation. It's saying that you are talking about community within your jurisdiction. And the other country might also do the same thing from the other side. If you can do it, that's nice. I think it could be a joint nomination also. That would be wonderful. But I think the convention doesn't stop a state party for that.
So I had some subsequent questions.
Yeah.
If the collaboration can be done, then is it a rule of the state or accredited NGO, or or is it a rule of the community that collaboration can be approached?
I think, in my understanding, ideally the convention would like to think at the community level itself.
Okay.
However, some facilitation would be required. So I think this is where the accredited NGO might play a role. I don't think the government state party itself might come into the picture proactively, but this is where the NGOs are also very important.
Okay, so I would like to
say something.
Shukant, please finish your. Then I'll stop.
Okay, thank you, Didi. I would like to bring an example. In 2013, in the 8th session of Intergovernmental Committee of ICH in Baku, Azerbaijan, there was a presentation or the inscription of Manipuri Sankirtan, which has been inscribed as the ICH element of India. But there are also Manipuris in Bangladesh too. They are also practicing this. So, can the Manipuris of Bangladesh take this or tell something about this ICH element in the next committee, or
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It will be up to the state party of Bangladesh to decide which element they want to nominate in the representative list or urgent safeguarding list, depending on the situation. And they can absolutely do it. It is not dependent on what India has done and not done. That's the difference between the World Heritage Convention and the ICH, that in terms of operation and going and nominating something, this convention has, there is no hierarchy, there is no first come first serve or anything. Because it's about representing your country, and ICH convention, the lists are very open that way. There is no limitations also.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
My question is some political question, because now we have with us Savia Parvin ma'am. I just want to know that if any political way that Manipuri, they are living in Bangladesh, that they call the Bangladeshi Manipuri community. If there any way, in political way, that I just want to know.
I don't know what you mean by political way, but by all means you can call it as a Bangladeshi Manipuri or however you want to call it, because again, this current modern nation states, these borders are very recent phenomena. Whereas the origin of ICS, the practice goes far, earlier in history. So I think culture is a more complex and nuanced thing than the political boundaries and all that. So, I mean, I can easily connect. For example, if you think of Nepali literature, Nepal is a country, and Nepali being its sort of national language, doesn't stop from the Nepalis living in Sikkim and Darjeeling in India to come up with Nepali literature. and that literary label, they don't distinguish themselves as being a politically Nepali or the culturally Nepali thing. They're Nepali, I think that's a very strong thing. So I think this political thing probably is a secondary thing here. I think the culture can always come above, and in fact, in many cases, this could be the sort of a resilience or sort of negotiating or I don't know, bridging factor also. I think it has so much power to it. So I think that's the other nice thing about this ICH movement also. Yeah, so I think, the community can come forward, recognize themselves, because ultimately this ICH inventorying and nomination is all about identifying the community, giving them a recognition, giving them a voice, and respecting, bringing their culture and practice, no matter how minority they are, giving them that place and the recognition. So yes, by all means, I think.
Yeah, because recently the one of the members of the Hajong community, which is also in India, they wear something called the pathin. That is, they have lost the art of weaving the pathin, and it is always imported from India. But now the community wants to revive it. So in all probability, we will have to take the help of the Indian community, the Hajong community, to revive this. And Madam Sabiha Parveen was very interested in building an awareness within the Bangladeshi Hajong about trying to relearn the art of weaving.
Absolutely, I think that could be done, and if it can be done, I think that's wonderful. Yeah, why not?
Any other questions from our participants? Alam Khurshid, apni অনেকক্ষণ ধরে চুপচাপ আছেন।
I came to learn basically, here, and I'm glad that I joined today. Thank you very much, Mr. Neel Kamal, because for last few weeks we have been listening or hearing all the theoretical stuff only, all this codes and conventions and all these nitty-gritty things. But for the first time, I could really experience something very living and something which is already going on. It's not done yet, and thanks to you that your institute has taken this initiative in KUTCH, we could be a part of this. And it really opened up a window to us how to actually engage a community, how to immerse yourself into the community, how to get their involvement and give back to the community, and finally, present something very tangible thing. But my question was, it's not a question, it's comment, that because in a way you are privileged as an university or as an institute that your students, graduate students, part of their curriculum, they have to go there, because it's part of their curriculum. If they have to present something, so it's not just a voluntary kind of thing. It's almost like a commitment, like an educational commitment. Also, you were advantageous in another way that you had one of your adjunct faculty coming from that community, so she is based there. So both ways, you are greatly, in an advantageous position. But it might not happen in all other projects, right? So don't you think so that there is a challenge to motivate volunteers, motivate people to go there, stay there, immerse themselves? And also there are some, I think, financial aspects also involved here, because as an institute, maybe, you could take care of the expenses and you had a budget and all those. So how do you address this whole thing, apart from the students, if you want to really do it in a general format?
Answer this question, we have with us the head of the department of the folklore department in Mymensingh, Sakar Mustafa. He has raised his hand, so maybe once he has also questioned you, you can reply together. Sakar?
Yeah, so let me, okay, yeah, all right, yeah. Let's hear from Sakar first.
Thank you, Neel Kamal. I have an opinion about the Neel Kamal's speech, that he says that about Nepali and others. I will talk that the Nepali is not always Nepali, because when Nepali is in Bangladesh, Sylhet, or Hajong is in Durgapur of Mymensingh, that times their culture, their language, and some others specific system is far different. So when we will speak about them, that will be considered about their difference also. Thank you.
Yes, I think I agree with your comment. Yes, differences. That's why I think at some point I mentioned that we should not think of community as one piece. I don't think there is, even however small that community is, it's always diverse. There are always communities within a community also. So I think you're right. I think I should not be using Nepali as a very blanket term. There is always diversity, and depending on where one is located, I absolutely agree. Now going back to Alam's question, let me start with two disclaimers. One is, Lubna, again, I would have to mention that this is not our initiative. We are rather just a learner. We are a small center, very young, have been running this program for the last 5 years only. So we needed some good cases to learn from. And so that brings to, in a way, answering Alam's question. I think why we reached there is because of the program design, because we designed the program because we felt at the core of it, heritage learning cannot happen just by the experts, discourses. It has to happen from other kind of discourses, and that led us to KUTCH. So this was the program design that was requiring any community case to be engaged with on a consistent basis. That was the thought behind the program design, and I was from the very beginning part of the program design. Now that brings to my second disclaimer, which is I had no clue about KUTCH until I started teaching in the program. I joined the university 2 years before the program started. So while designing the program, only this philosophy was there that heritage cannot be learned without having these stakeholders to teach you. You can't have a so-and-so PhD, so-and-so expert, so-and-so UNESCO come and teach you about heritage. You have to have these important teachers in your communities or nearby communities. And so that program design was done that way. And after the program was passed and we were about to launch, and we were launching in 2015, then we started thinking, okay, now where are these communities? Where are our partners, knowledge partners? That's how we came to know about SUSMA. That's how we came to know about KUTCH. And then we designed, okay, this is how we're going to start. And otherwise, me coming from Nepal, I had no clue where is Gujarat, where is KUTCH, what is happening there. Absolutely no idea. I had only this idea that as an academician, I had this academic program we're launching. So I think what I can say very proudly is, as a faculty, what I took is every field component of the program that we had, whether it's immersion, whether it's this indigenous knowledge systems, or even students practicum and all that, I took time to go with each of these components because I had to learn, right? So this attitude gradually, made sure that, I'm also learning, my colleagues are also learning. And because of that, we realized, a very fresh new center, we are learning so much from this community, we owe something to them. And that's the idea that led to the Heritage Learning Lab, which is just last year's thing. It's only very recent thing. So that's why I think, again, we didn't do anything. We were only learning, and we only ethically felt that we also need to contribute back, and that's the process. And as I said, it's not mastered yet, but what we feel good is, and because the students also engage and learn, and it's a deep learning, it's not a learning where you give an exam and do good. It transforms somebody's life, out of 10 students, if one student gets transformed because of this experience, I think that tells something. And so that's why we believe in this model. We're trying to work through this model. We have not perfected. So Lubna, I think what you're doing, wonderful thing, workshop like this and all that. I think we should talk in some other ways also to see what can we learn from each other. Of course, when things come back to normal and we have some review meeting with our students who are working there, I'm sure there are 100 things listed, that the students have made a list that the challenges that they're facing. I think we need to talk about it. But I think it's going somewhere. It's a nice process.
I was also thinking that maybe some of our students can join your institute.
Absolutely. In fact, last year we were trying to do that, to invite students from other institutes also and go and at least understand this process, because we found this very fascinating. Students just love this part that they have to go to KUTCH and spend time and engage. They absolutely love it. And I can see the transformation, their attitude, their thinking. And I think as an educational institution, that's very important. If you can give that bit of thing in a student's mind, no textbook, no expert can give you that.
Sure. So this is an institute which is affiliated with the Ahmedabad University?
Yes. It's absolutely Ahmedabad University Center for Heritage Management. Very small center within the university.
And
but
you're
then
just
university
offering a postgraduate.
Right, a master's program in heritage management. And the way we offer is it's very open program. A historian, an architect, an archaeologist, musician, anybody can join as long as they have an agenda about heritage. And we just do some interviews, and then so
how long
we
is
have
the program?
2 years.
Oh, that's a long time, 2 years.
Yeah, it's a 2 years, full 2 years commitment. Yes, yes.
So thank you so
we have
very
been working
much.
with, they were indigenous communities or the mainstream Indian communities there? Those few villages we're working with.
That's a good question, and I'm not able to distinguish in an anthropological sense. But what I would like to share is, for example, many of them, like in fact, one of the recent students who is an architecture background. So she also did her thesis on, the settlements in KUTCH. Now she was facing challenge that this many of her participants, the collaborators, couldn't understand Hindi, which is kind of a mainstream language in India. When the Gujarati students go to that region, they say, "Oh, their Gujarati is different than ours. Like, it's a different Gujarati." So these nuances are there. But I'll tell you the history. So many of these communities, they are mixed. They have a long history. This Kamal, if you read this document, there are 3 types of communities that this document talks about. One community migrated long back from Sindh province, which is currently in Pakistan. One community even came further from Afghanistan. They were migrating, traveling, and then they came and settled. Some came from some parts of northern India. But over the course of time, because the landscape is so different, your lifestyle sort of changes, and you collaborate with other community, you develop an interaction. So this culture has evolved that way. So it's a mixed community, I would say. There is nomadic community, there is hardcore settled communities, and it's a very
also by the look of their attire, it seems that some of them are Muslims by religion also.
Yes, it's mixed. Some of them are Muslims, some of them are Hindus, some of them are convert Hindus, some of them are convert Muslims. Multiple things happening. I don't know, Alam, your background, but for an anthropologist, minefield. For an architect, it's a treasure. Me as an architect, I see the bungas, the mud houses, and all that. It's a very, so in that sense, I think we are privileged to be close to KUTCH so that we can take a train overnight, go there, spend some time, and then it's not as if like you are in a very remote-est place. I mean, you will always find some kind of vehicle to rent out and travel and all that, while maybe on the road you are sharing the road with the camel and the other things. So it's a mix. It's a very interesting mix.
You are blessed.
That way, yes, we are blessed to be there. But I believe every part of India has that, and same with Bangladesh.
Thank you. No, it was a great pleasure to attend your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Neel Kamal. Really, we are very privileged because this gave us a totally new perspective of hands-on immersion within the community. And I would like to ask our additional secretary to say a few words before we end this session. A very, very interesting and informative session. I would like to ask Sabiha Parveen ji to say a few words.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lubnapa. At first, I would like to thank to you because such a wonderful knowledge sharing events you arrange in this situation. And not last, most of all, I would like to give many thanks to Dr. Neel Kamal for his nice presentation also and explanation how we can do the community-based intangible culture heritage research also, and how you create this document also. And maybe your sharing knowledge we can utilize in our case also. Our government already established seven defined region, that's type of ethnic cultural center. We can use this center like maybe in a small way, but it have attachment with university. It is a center, but in our case also there is a very small at the community level. We had that type of institution. We can use these types of institutions as like a collaborative effect with NGO, government, and community. That's three actors. We can make our collaborative effects with this institution. And That's why I'm wondering to know your subject is very interesting, and you have opportunity to meet lot of students in your center, and they are eager to know their heritage also. In our case, we can maybe we can make such kind of, maybe I will discuss. I'm not the supreme authority. I'll discuss in the ministry. We can make such kind of, mechanism, how we can collaborative, how we can take the collaborative initiatives with NGO and that kind of institution. And I think in future days, it will be helpful for us. Thank you very much for giving such kind of, sharing your knowledge, and we enrich. I think all participants enrich their knowledge by your presentation. Thank you again very much. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope this was useful. And I must thank my students and Susma Iyengar and other colleagues in KUTCH who had been the teachers, and I've learned a little bit from them, and that's what I said. So I think there is so much to be learned from them. So if any time you would like to get more first-hand accounts of how things go and all that, I would be happy to connect you to my graduates. Even Susma, who is super busy, but I'm sure she would also be happy to talk to you at some other occasions.
Maybe we could put your students in touch with our participants, especially from the folklore department, so that they can...
Absolutely, I think that would be wonderful. In fact, every December we do an international conference also. Mm-hmm. But this year we don't know whether we will manage. I think it's probably not feasible. So this year we might do it online. But yeah, by all means, I think we can network.
Yes, please do let us know if it is an online event, and ask our participants and students to also be part of it. Thank you again so very much, Kamal. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Really, I am very enriched with this, and it is making me think a lot about our own project. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll see you again. And
see you. Look forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
bye.
Neel Kamal. Okay.
Bye bye.
Let me know. Let me know if you found this in a bamboo story. If not, I'll send you the link.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Let me know. Okay.
Sure.
Take care. Good night. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good night.
Bye bye.
Good night. Bye bye. Thank you.
আমি সব পার্টিসিপেন্টসদেরকে বলছি যে তোমরা কিন্তু গত রেসপন্সটাও পাঠাওনি, আর এই রেসপন্সটাও নেক্সটটাতে দেবে, ঠিক আছে? তোমাদের কেমন লাগলো? খুব চুপচাপ ছিলে তোমরা, একজন দুজন ছাড়া কেউ কথা বলেনি, আর রেসপন্স আমি পাচ্ছি না। কিন্তু আমি আজকে শুধু দুটা রেসপন্স পেয়েছি, একটা মৌলির কাছ থেকে, একটা প্রীতি দাস চৌধুরীর কাছ থেকে। রেসপন্স না দিলে আমরা তো বুঝতে পারি না যে যেগুলো করাচ্ছি সেটা তোমাদের কেমন লাগছে, কি বুঝতে পারছো, তাই না? অনেক কাজ জমে যাবে কিন্তু তোমরা যদি, আর মাত্র 250-300 শব্দের এইটুকু যদি স্টুডেন্টসরা না লিখতে পারে তাহলে তো খুবই দুঃখজনক হয়ে যায়।
ম্যাম
বলো।
নিপা পাল বলছিলাম ম্যাম, আমারটা তো পাঠিয়েছি।
হ্যাঁ, তোমারটা পেয়েছি, কিন্তু তুমি এটা 1 সপ্তাহ দেরি করে পাঠিয়েছো। আজকে তোমার দেবার কথা।
ম্যাম না ম্যাম, আমি গত শুক্রবারে পাঠিয়েছি, আপনাকে ফোনও দিয়েছিলাম, কিন্তু আমার নামটা আসেনি, আমি আজকে আবার দিয়েছি এজন্য।
ও আচ্ছা, কেন জানি তোমাদের কি হয়, যেটা আমি ডকুমেন্ট যখন সেভ করবে, এটাকে বলে কম্পিউটার হাউসকিপিং। ডকুমেন্ট যখন সেভ করবে তখন নিজের নামটা তো থাকবে না। আমার ল্যাপটপে, আমার কম্পিউটারে, আমার হার্ড ডিস্কে হাজার ডকুমেন্ট আছে। যখন সেভ করার সময় যদি নিপা পাল ক্রিটিক্যাল থিঙ্কিং লেখো, তাহলে আমার ওটা খুঁজে পেতে খুব, আমি কি তো বুঝাতে পেরেছি? দিস ইজ ভেরি সিম্পল হাউসকিপিং ফর কম্পিউটার ম্যানেজমেন্ট। যখন একটা ডকুমেন্ট সেভ করবে, সবচেয়ে আগে নিজের নামটা লিখবে, তারপরে কি অ্যাসাইনমেন্টের নাম লিখবে, তারপর ডেট দিবে। আমি কি এটা বুঝাতে পেরেছি? এই জিনিসগুলো তোমাদের লেভেলে আসলে বলতে হয় না, তোমাদের অটোমেটিকলি জানা উচিত। আমি দেখছি প্রায় ডকুমেন্ট পাঠাচ্ছ, ওই ডকুমেন্টের মধ্যে না তোমার নাম আছে, না ডেট আছে। এগুলো হলো সিম্পল হাউসকিপিং রুলস।
ম্যাম নাম এবং অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট লিখে তারপর হচ্ছে বিষয়টা লিখে পাঠিয়েছি, একটু চেক
হ্যাঁ এখন তো পেয়েছি তোমারটা, কিন্তু আগে
থ্যাংক ইউ
তো
ম্যাম।
হ্যাঁ আর অনেকের বাকি আছে। আর আজকে আই থিঙ্ক only 2 people, স্মৃতি আর মৌলি, তোমরা আপ টু ডেট করেছো। আনন্দিতা তোমার কি হলো? তুমি তো লিখতে অভ্যস্ত, কেন লিখছো না?
না খালা, আমার রিসেন্টলি একটা পরীক্ষা গেল, তো ওটার জন্য আমি পাঠাবো, কালকের মধ্যে পাঠিয়ে দেবো। আমার গতকালকে এক্সাম ছিল, তো ওটার প্রিপারেশন নিচ্ছিলাম।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, ভালো লাগলো তোমাদের? I found it very interesting.
আপা একটা কথা আছে আপা।
জি বলেন।
আপা থ্যাংক ইউ যে আপা এই ধরনের যে রিসোর্স পারসন দিয়ে কথা বলা, যে আমরা যে শুনছি বা কনফারেন্স স্টাইলেই হচ্ছে অনেকটা, তো সেটা আমাদের জন্য অনেক উপকার হচ্ছে নিশ্চয়ই। কিন্তু আমার মনে হয় আরেকটা কাজ করা দরকার সবাইকে নিয়ে আপনার, সেটা হলো যে একদম হাতে কলমে ফিল্ডে নিতে হবে। যে কোনো একটা প্রজেক্টে কোনো একটা এথনিক গোষ্ঠীর সাথে বা কোনো একটা জায়গায় আমাদের হাতে কলমে 2-3 দিনের একটা ওয়ার্কশপ করতে হবে এবং ওখানে এই কাজটা করতে হবে,
এখন কোভিড এর
তাহলে
সময়
এটা আসলে
করতে
এই
পারছি না।
আউটপুট আসবে আপা।
যেটা আমরা করতে পারি, কোভিড এর সময় আমি 2-3 দিন পর আমি ঠাকুরগাঁও একটা সাঁওতাল কমিটির সাথে এরকম অনলাইন ওয়ার্কশপ করাচ্ছি। তখন যদি তোমরা জয়েন করতে পারো, কারণ সাঁওতাল কমিউনিটির ছেলেমেয়েরা এটা শুধু করবে, ওদের সাথে কথা বলতে পারো। দেখি আমি কি করতে পারি, কোনো একটা যদি কমিউনিকেশন করা
সেটা ভালো হয়। কিন্তু হলো যে আপনার প্র্যাকটিক্যাল ফিল্ডে আসলে যে কাজ করাটার
সেটা তো
গুরুত্ব
কোভিড শেষ
আলাদা,
হয়ে
এবং
গেলে
সেটা হয়তো আপনার একটু পরে হবে।
কোভিড শেষ হয়ে গেলে তো আমরা
মানে কোভিডটা
অবশ্যই
ঠিক
করব।
হলে, হ্যাঁ
কিন্তু
অবশ্যই। থ্যাংক ইউ।
এটা আমার আমার নিজের চিন্তা হলো যে বাধা কিভাবে অতিক্রম করতে হয় সেটা আমাদেরকে ভাবতে হবে। কোনো বাধা বিপত্তি আসলে আমরা চুপ করে বসে থাকবো না, এইটাই হলো আমার নিজের দর্শন। কাজ চালিয়ে যাব, পরে যখন সুবিধা হবে তখন যাব। ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান। কালকে আবার 9টার সময় দেখা হবে। তখন কিন্তু আমি সবগুলো আমি লেখাগুলো চাই, রেসপন্স চাই। কালকে আমরা একটু আরেকটা জিনিস সম্বন্ধে একটু কথা বলবো, ট্রান্সলিটারেশন গাইডলাইনস নিয়ে। তো দেখা হবে, ঠিক আছে? থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান।
থ্যাংক ইউ মাসি।
বাই
বাই।
থ্যাংক ইউ খালা।
Thank you, everyone. Good night.